Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Contract Lifecycle Management Delivers Insights and Strategic Value, presented by Ironclad. I'm your host, Alex Bradley from the Ironclad marketing team, and I'm joined by special guest speaker, Forrester's senior analyst, Alla Valente. Alla is an expert in governance, risk, and compliance, as well as contract lifecycle management. Alla advises Fortune 1000 clients on how to manage risk, improve business resilience, and unlock strategic value. Alla, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, so glad to be here, Alex. Thanks so much for having me today. So we're talking about contracts.
Yes, we are. And thank you, Alla. And thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us today. We have a great agenda, and I hope you'll learn a lot. Alla recently completed an in-depth evaluation of the CLM market, speaking to vendors, their customers, and her own enterprise client base. And today she's going to share key insights that emerged during that process. Today, you're going to learn about the major trends taking place in CLM, including how CLM supports strategic business priorities, why CLM is moving toward platforms rather than domain-specific suites, and the key criteria businesses should use when evaluating CLM solutions. So with that, Alla, what does our audience need to know about CLM?
Yeah, great segue. So let me first set the stage a little bit. This is not a meme, but it could be. I know we've seen it all over social media, right? Like, tell me you're a child of the 80s without telling me you're a child of the 80s. But if I asked you, what does your business do without telling me what your business does, I could hand you a contract and you would have a lot of information. You would know what my strategy is, who I do business with, in what geographies, perhaps what types of product lines I'm supporting, who are some of my partners and counterparts. There is a whole lot of information that contracts hold. Now, the fact that contracts are legal obligations for these business relationships has been the crux of what contracts have been used for. But where we are with technology today, the fact that every business, whether they want to believe it or not, or whether they're actively moving towards or not, every business is a digital business, which means the contract holds the key to what those commitments look like and under what conditions. And when contract intelligence isn't shared more broadly, when there are agreements or changes to terms that are made that are not, let's say, visible to contract management professionals, interesting, but not always good things happen. And here's a case in point. Now, look, we've all had our experience with Zoom. Certainly during the pandemic, it was one of the platforms of choice. And very soon, verbs like Zoom bombing entered our lexicon. But you might not know this. Zoom had a little bit of a kerfuffle this summer. So what happened was, in March of this year, Zoom changed their terms of service, basically saying that, hey, customers, we can take your data, meaning that we can take things like transcripts of your conversations, recordings of your voice, even facial recognition, and we can use that to train our own AI model. And that change happened quite, quietly. And it wasn't supposed to take place, or it wasn't supposed to become active until July 27th. Well, let's put it this way. The market at large was not very happy, and nor should they be, because there are some really significant privacy concerns when you're using personal information, confidential information, proprietary information in some cases, to train an AI model. Now, when Zoom first made this change, originally it wasn't an opt-out, right? Like, you couldn't opt out. If you chose not to allow Zoom to do this, you couldn't use their software. The security and privacy and risk management community, got up in arms. And what ended up happening is Zoom backtracked this decision. Except it left a very lasting impression on the market, meaning that there were changes that were being made possibly quietly, because if you were not in security or in privacy. Maybe you were just a contract management professional, right? Maybe you worked in finance. Maybe you worked in procurement. You might not have known this change was happening. And yet, if you had your CLM that was tracking any changes to terms and conditions, and if you automated that to say, let me know if there are any terms that have changed in the last 14 days, in the last 30 days, and that have to do with things like AI, training, models, you would have been notified. And what I'm really finding in the CLM market today is that the CLM as a technology has so much business value, but it hasn't yet been unlocked by a lot of contract management professionals who are still more or less using this to just automate the contracting process. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is, like I mentioned earlier, there is this shift towards digital, and it's not optional. It's something that all organizations realized during the pandemic, which is that if they don't digitize, their business could die, because any type of disruption that seems to come almost back to back and from any direction, from any corner of the third-party ecosystem, has disruptive abilities. And without being a digital business, meaning that digital technology is not just embedded in how you serve customers, right? It's not just the front-end customer-facing window dressing. That form of digitalization has to be in all of the operations of the business, especially in the contracting process, but also all of the intelligence of the contract has to move towards digital, because we don't have an option, right? Every organization that I speak with has some form of generative AI strategy. Certainly some are moving faster, some are moving slower. Even those that say, you know what, we don't have a Gen AI strategy, that in itself is a strategy. If the contracting process is not also keeping up pace with that form of digitalization, they're not going to be able to not just support the business in the transformation, but really become a value, a strategic partner to the business. And that's why I very often say that when you have a business strategy that you're trying to execute on, so it could be generative AI, but maybe this is just a new product we're launching. Maybe we're expanding to a different geography. Maybe we have found a new way to service our customers. Contracts could either accelerate that type of change and progress, or they could very much impede it. I mean, we've all been at organizations where the business strategy is moving, but a lot of the support, maybe the vendors or suppliers or even customers, are being held up by the contracting process. We can't have that. The world moves at lightning speed, and it's time for contract management to move at the same pace, if not even quicker. Now, the other thing that I'm hearing more and more often is risk. And risk is part of just about every conversation I have about legal, about commerce. I mean, it's part of every type of strategic initiative that I support Forrester clients on. But here's what I want you to know about risk. For too long, risk has been this negative connotation. It's been that 4-letter word. And yet, risk is also the flip side of opportunity. Because if we are not taking risks, we're probably not growing, we're probably not innovating, we're probably not doing something different than our competitors to be able to differentiate. But when I talk about risk in the context of contract management, there are multiple layers of risk. There's the risk in the contract. So do I have the right clauses? Do I have the right terms? Do I have the right protections? There's risk of the engagement, because oftentimes we have customers that we will sell multiple things to, or maybe we'll have vendors or suppliers that will provide multiple support us in multiple ways. So the engagement is made up of multiple contracts with that same counterparty. And then there's risk to our business. What is the risk? Not just that this particular contract doesn't perform or this particular counterparty, but from this type of relationship, from how we've set out the terms, from how we're going to be serviced or how we have to service our customers, what are those risks? Because if I bring this back to Zoom to say, the risk was not just that there was a change in the terms of service. The risk was that without knowing it, without really being aware that there was that change, and without having someone in our legal and compliance team read over what the new conditions were, the training of AI, right? If I had just clicked accept, I may have been accepting something that goes against not only my organization's policies, but maybe goes against all of the contracts that I have with my customers that say we won't use their personal information to train our AI. And now not only are we doing that, but we're giving a third party permission to do the same. And that's why governance is so critical today. So one of the markets that I cover at Forrester is governance, risk, and compliance. It's also known as GRC. And for many years, this market's been around for over 20 years since the passage of Sarbanes-Oxley. GRC has been focused on compliance because we were under the impression that if we complied with all of the regulations, the policies, the controls that were set out, well, then we'd be actively managing risk. Now, unfortunately, what we've learned is that we could be fully compliant, but still have a lot of significant risk exposure. And that's why risk and also resilience, which are two sides of the same coin, really, have made this resurgence during I would say between 2020 and late 22. But with the speed of innovation, with so much change in regulation, with a lot of unprecedented change in economic conditions, in global and geopolitical environments, governance has made this resurgence to say governance is how we ensure that those things that we've contracted for are going to be delivered in the way that we've negotiated, right? I mean, think of it this way. You wouldn't want to build a home, work with an architect to design this beautiful home, contract with a general contractor, and then not show up to see, has the home been built exactly to spec? Is it on budget? Is it on time? You would want to make sure that there's someone there to manage that project. The interesting thing about CLM today is a lot of our time is spent just creating the contract, negotiating, and executing. And what happens after that contract is signed? Well, let's just say that a lot of the attention tapers off, which is a little sad because that's where the key opportunity to add value to the business, to add value to third-party relationships, to be able to really have not just better commercial terms, but better commercial relationships. That's where that falls. And I can almost see why legal isn't, or rather CLM isn't as focused on the governance piece. And a lot of it has to do with investment. So this is Forrester data that I thought was quite interesting. We asked technology decision makers, whether they're investing, or rather where they were going to be investing in technology, and sort of what their software strategy was. And look at legal. I mean, I almost feel bad, right? You have all of this investment that's happening in other parts of the business. They're going to invest in operations. They're going to invest in supply chain and procurement. I mean, look, some of those things at the top, we know are critical to operating a business. But the fact that legal is at the very bottom of the list, to me, says the business does not recognize or value the benefits and the strategic value that CLM brings to the table, not just from a contracting perspective, but strategically benefiting the organization. And one of the reasons why this seems to occur is that, when I speak to Forrester clients about CLM, they'll often talk about this. Well, okay, we have all of our contracts in this digital repository, and that's great. I mean, that's an amazing start. But CLM is bigger than just a digital repository. Look, we have SharePoints, we have other types of internal systems to store files and vast amounts of data, but we're not mining that for information to help us improve how we work, but also how our organizations deliver value. CLM has to go beyond just the digital repository. It's great to get things in there. It's great to extract all of the key pieces of information, but that information also needs to be accessible, searchable, and really just readily available. CLM is also bigger than just the templates and clauses, and I touched on that a little bit earlier to say there's a lot of efficiency that a CLM platform will provide. And there could be many different types of templates for different types of contracts. There will be workflow around it. There will be notifications. It's all about the process to get this contract to the execution stage. And hallelujah, like we're there, right? Except that to really reach that pinnacle of where the information inside of those contracts serves the organization as a whole, can inform strategy, can support business decisions, you have to go beyond just those templates and clauses and look at the portfolios of contracts from start to finish, from the pre-signature to the post-signature process. And this is a model that Forrester had created when we did our analysis on the CLM market to really talk about the 6 stages of CLM. Now, there's a reason that it's not just CM, contract management, right? I mean, we refer to CLM because there's a life cycle. And that life cycle starts when you're first creating that digital contract library. But there are so many other stages. The integrations, both with upstream applications as well as downstream. There's the analysis, but also the optimization. So how do we take what's already in our CLM, right? That intelligence, that data, and help us not only write better contracts with better clauses, but how do we vastly improve the process to contract? Maybe it's a shortening of time. Maybe it's about building better commercial relationships. But it's also about how do we provide value back to the business from that insights. And historically, CLMs have had 2 primary owners or users. It's been the procurement team and the legal team. what's really interesting is that, and I'll share in a few slides, the CLM, these might be the two roles that actively use CLM the most, but the CLM has so much intelligence and insights to offer so many other teams. For example, it can help sales understand their planning. It can help finance do financial predictions. It could help compliance and risk management teams understand what types of policies are that counterparties are being held to, what types of relationships and how customer data is being used, and whether it's not just compliant, but also a best practice from a security and risk management perspective. It could help the CIO understand, okay, what does my technology strategy look like? What technologies do I currently have? What stages of the relationship, is it in? Are there some key areas that we're missing because we don't see contracts for those key things? And also at the same time, do we have a lot of overlap or redundancy of technologies in other areas? And, how do we fill in those gaps? And so CLM, not only is it about the life cycle of the process, but it's also about unlocking that information, that critical information for all of these other areas of the business. And like I mentioned, we did an overview. We started with an overview of the CLM market, which was the CLM landscape, really looking at the CLM technologies today, their capabilities, the use cases that they support. And then we moved into a Forrester Wave report, which is really that deeper evaluation. I could honestly say I have looked under the hood of every technology that was in that report extensively. And the process takes about 5 months. Yes, we ask information of the vendors themselves, but that information is also validated in live demos, fact-checked. We speak to customer references. We get information from the market. So there are multiple checkpoints there to be able to not just consume the information that's given, but to really validate it. And the way a Forrester Wave works is that it's not an absolute score, but a relative score, meaning that if all of the vendors in the report have these specific capabilities, those capabilities are then considered pretty much par. Some vendors will have capabilities that go above and beyond, and those are considered superior. And others might just lag a little or might be able to deliver on those capabilities, but either with integrations or some additional type of products or services, and those might be considered below par. In any case, what the report did highlight was not just the technical capabilities, right? So like the product functionality, but also the strategy and the execution of the vendors in this space. And here are some of the findings from that report. Kind of shocking and yet not shocking at all. 82% of all of the customer references, so I believe there was about 45 in total we spoke with, were using their first CLM solution. Now, that doesn't mean they just purchased their first CLM. I mean, some of these folks have been using a solution for a number of years, but still, the vast majority being on their first CLM really highlights that this market, it's not totally nascent, but at the same time, it's not a mature market. It's still kind of somewhere in that middle stage with a lot of opportunity for growth. We also found that for those organizations that invested in CLM, well, one of the reasons they did was because it replaced truly archaic processes. And I mean, something like 40% said that they were still using email before their CLM. About another 41% said they were using SharePoint. 25% said that their CLM replaced like Office 365, so just a combination of all of those tools. But the vast majority of those processes was manual. So CLM is really going in to do that first, I would say, first wave of automation. We also found that 36% of the respondents said they're using the CLM that they were a reference for. They're using it for all of their contracts. And I know that historically we've looked at the market from a buy-side contract or a sales-side contract, but what we're starting to see is that organizations, in order to really align CLM or contracting with the greater enterprise strategy, are starting to standardize on a single CLM. Now, it's 36% today. When we repeat, this type of evaluation, probably in the next 12 to 18 months, I expect that number to be in the mid 40s, because we are seeing a lot more organizations saying, we want everything to be consistent, we want everything to be integrated, and we want it accessible. So we're going to start to see that integration of buy-side, sales-side. And not a huge shock, 52% of all of the CLM deals or all of the CLM purchases from the customer references we spoke with were driven by the legal team. Legal, had to say either they initiated the purchase or they're the ones who had the final say and approval on it. But that said, CLM, or at least the selection and evaluation, is not really, a one-team show. In fact, these were the teams that were most commonly involved in that evaluation and selection, legal leads. But look at IT. IT is front and center in that selection and evaluation process, compliance, finance, risk. On average, we found that organizations involved about 3.5 teams in making that final selection on their CLM. Now, this was a little shocking, I have to be honest, because CLMs are feature rich. There are so many features and so much rich functionality that could be utilized. And yet when we asked, how much of your CLM's capabilities are you currently using? 48% are using, they're using about half. And unfortunately, not enough of the capabilities in CLMs are getting utilized. And there's a slide I have in just a moment that hopefully will help explain this. But once a CLM is purchased, right, you don't bite off the entire pie. You kind of try and digest it in pieces, which means that there are stages to that implementation. And if that implementation isn't completed fully, you end up just using pieces of it rather than the entirety that you were hoping to be able to utilize. And so a lot of this speaks to the implementation process, but also really the holistic automation of the contracting process within the CLM. Another topic that I wanted to point out was AI, because just about every conversation I have with Forrester clients about CLM will ask about the AI capabilities. Everyone wants AI to do everything in the CLM, which is great because we know that there are a lot of benefits. I mean, AI is in every RFP. But when we asked, okay, so how much did those AI capabilities actually factor in your decision for selecting and purchasing the CLM? Only 11% said that it was a significant factor for them. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing the same thing. I don't know how much AI capabilities you're using in your current CLM tool, but because there is this disconnect between how much it's talked about and also how it's underutilized, means that there's a huge area, like there's so much room for improvement as we scale our adoption of AI within the contract management process. And then finally, I wanted to understand things like price and platform flexibility and integration, right? Like how important are they to actual end users of CLM technologies? And I have to say, this also shocked me a little, but in a very pleasant way, because what we found is that ease of use is the most important aspect, right? That's what's going to move the needle for organizations to go from evaluation to selection of that CLM. Is it easy to use? Next up is the technical capabilities, right? Does it have all of the features from a technical perspective that I'm looking for? But look at number 3, the vendor support. So this included things like the implementation experience, how the vendor will support the CLM on an ongoing basis, what types of trainings they provide, what that service level looks like. CLM is one of these technologies that undergoes a lot of change. CLM, the configuration of the CLM will change as the business strategy changes. And so what CLM buyers are looking for is a strong vendor-customer relationship. And price, it's not unimportant for sure, but the fact that we didn't see it in the top 3, I think, speaks volumes. And then finally, the strategic value. So earlier I showed that life cycle of the 6 stages of CLM. This takes a look at how much progress has been made in those stages. So, we see that 89% have implemented that digital repository, another 71% are actively using reports and doing analysis on the contracts they have. 74 are using it to automate the actual creation and negotiation of the contracts. And then there's this huge dip. The integration pieces, whether we're integrating with upstream applications like sourcing and procurement, or downstream applications like payment systems and other types of transaction history, huge drop off. And then the optimization, how we're using the insights from the process and also from the contract to improve how we contract. It's a little bit higher, but still, well below 50%. And what that says to me is that until those last 3 stages can get to at least 51%, right? Once we hit that 51%, that's when CLM is really going to provide that type of strategic insights and intelligence into the business. And then finally, every organization has a different pain point. Everyone has a different driver that makes them finally give up their spreadsheets and their SharePoint and their email and look for an automated contract lifecycle management tool. And these are the top 3 that we found. For 67%, they want to improve the efficiency of the contracting process. It takes too long, it takes too much work, it's burdensome, and we need to get it done, not just faster, but less painfully. For 53%, they want to understand what's really in their contracts. They're looking for that visibility, that transparency. This is the 53% that's looking for those subtle changes, those nuances. How does the aggregate of the information that we have in our contracts, how can that help us make those types of business decisions more confidently? And then finally, a little under 25%, but still optimizing resources. We have more contracts to get through because we have growing ecosystems. Hopefully we have way more customers, but we can't keep throwing resources at the problem. We need to be able to automate so that we can still have the same number of resources or maybe add slightly, but we could just use them more effectively. And these are the three drivers for CLM investment today. So with that, I'd love to, Alex, why don't we chat about, what do you want to know about CLM?
Thank you, Alla. I think your presentation covered a lot of ground, but in preparing for this webinar, we wanted to make sure that we explicitly cover the most common questions that we encounter from CLM buyers. So we sourced some questions from our customer base that we hear almost every day, and we'd like you to tackle them head on. You ready?
Quick fire, let's do it.
Okay, so a lot of our customer conversations revolve around value delivery. And so one of your last slides just talked about this. Why should CLM buyers look for value beyond contracting efficiency? And especially, why now?
So there's several reasons. One is that we have business technologies in other areas of the business that are doing double, triple duty, meaning that the speed of innovation now turns purpose-built solutions into something far greater with additional value. One, your CIO is likely going to say, look, we're making investments. We obviously want to be more efficient, but we're looking to first invest in those areas that we believe have strategic value to the business. And that was the slide that we saw a little earlier that had legal all the way at the bottom. What the areas of the business that they're investing in are those that they believe, those software investments are those that they believe are going to help the business navigate and to steer the ship in the direction that they want. What they're missing is that the CLM can do that, and it could probably do that better than so many of the other technologies on that list. But if we are only asking for budget to buy CLM to solve this efficiency issue without also offering a strategic value, then what we're doing is not only shortchanging the capabilities of the CLM, undercutting the value of what we do as contract management professionals, but we're completely getting deprioritized.
Okay, so next question. You mentioned earlier in your presentation that CLM is moving from suites to platforms. Why is that trend taking place?
So for quite a while, CLM existed as part of these much bigger suites. And often that was aligned to distinct processes, right? So if you look at, for example, the procurement, like the sourcing, procurement, payment process, or maybe it's like the sales alignment process, CLM was seen as just a means to an end. We contract so we can procure and we can then get all the stuff our company wants. Or we contract, but really it's like that, it's to get more customers. What we're finally seeing is that the contracting process not only has value on its own, but it is at the center of more than just procurement and sales. I mean, when we think about operations, our contracts are going to make sure that the technologies and also the partners that we have in our operations are not only correct, we don't have gaps in coverage, but are performing to what we require, right? When we think about contracting in the security and risk management process? I mean, are our vendors and suppliers, are they complying with the regulations that we're bound by? What about when those regulations change? How about standards or policies that we have for ourselves, right? Maybe our risk appetite is such that we don't want to go all in on AI or, other types of innovation. Is that being flowed down into those commercial relationships as well? Contracts will do that. I could, name other areas of the business as well, but contracting is not just a means to buy or sell. It has value, distinct and extraordinary, and needs to be recognized as such.
Okay, the final question is a two-parter, but it deals
okay.
with deploying the CLM. And so we get asked a lot about how do I approach integration and how do I approach adoption?
Ooh. Well, you could wave a magic wand. No, I guess you can't do that, can you? Okay. A few things we need to think about. The initial deployment. So the first part was integration and the second part was adoption, right?
Yes.
Okay. Where a lot of CLM's strengths and value comes from is, like I mentioned, sitting at the heart of all these other processes. And CLM could consume information from those other technologies, but can also bidirectionally give those other technologies information. So, for example, a lot of organizations I speak to right now are really struggling with third-party risk, right? Like risk from their vendors, risk from their suppliers. When you think about the integration of that CLM into something like a risk management tool, the information that the contract holds can help the risk and security and privacy team to make sure that those third parties are complying with policies, standards, requirements, SLAs. At the same time, the information that those technologies hold, right? So, hey, did this particular, company I've contracted with, did they have a security incident or a breach or maybe an insolvency event? Or maybe they were in the news for something that we think could impact their ability to continue to serve us. That information needs to flow bidirectionally. And so when we think about integrations, and Alex, I know you and I have spoken about this, many times, but open APIs are terrific. I mean, we've really made it far simpler for two different technologies to at least talk a language with sort of this Google Translate in the middle. But where it goes from Google Translate to something that is much more native is when you have these pre-configured integrations, because it's like the plumbing not only has been hooked up, but that's when you can start creating workflows that says, if this information comes into my CLM, what should I be doing with it? What's the process that I need to kick off and what happens next? And the same thing when the data goes into from the CLM into that other system. So maybe that data is going into a financial system to say, look, these are all of the customers that we have. Do we have enough resources to service all of these customers? Do we have the right tools to service these customers? So that integration is, I think, is key. And that slide I showed where integration, had really plummeted from after digitalization and analysis and contract creation, that's what's going to boost it up.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing these insights with us today. And audience, I hope you found this webinar helpful. If you'd like to learn more about the findings that Alla shared, then check your email because we'll be sending you a copy of the Forrester Wave for CLM along with the recording of this webinar. So thanks for joining us today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Alex, and thank you, everyone.